The sun over the Arizona territory did not just shine. It hammered. It was a relentless, white-hot weight that pressed down on the red dust, bleaching the color out of the scrub brush and turning the horizon into a shimmering mirage of heat waves. It was the summer of 1879, and the borderlands between the Arizona and New Mexico territories felt less like a home and more like an anvil where human endurance was tested against the iron will of nature. Redwater Crossing sat in the middle of this baking expanse like a mistake that was too stubborn to be corrected. It was a town of rough-hewn timber and ambitious dreams, anchored by the steel ribbons of the railroad that were slowly snaking their way west. The air always tasted of sulfur from the locomotives and dried manure from the stockyards. There was a church with a peeling white steeple, a telegraph office that hummed with news from a world far away, and a saloon that promised oblivion for the price of a whiskey. But mostly, there was dust. It coated the windows of the law office, settled in the creases of men's faces, and gritted between the teeth of anyone foolish enough to speak against the wind. May Calloway stood on the porch of her small cabin, 3 miles outside of town, wiping her forehead with the back of a gloved hand. She was 23 years old. Though the sun and the wind had etched fine lines around her eyes that made her look older, her hair, once a soft gold, had been burned by the seasons into the color of dried wheat, pulled back severely to keep it off her sweating neck. She looked out at Calloway Spring. It was the reason her father, a man broken by the war and mended by solitude, had chosen this patch of earth, in a land where creeks turned to dust bones in July. Calloway Spring was a miracle. It bubbled up cold and clear from deep within the red rock, feeding a small grove of cottonwoods and a vegetable patch that kept May from starving. "Just enough," she whispered to the empty air. Her voice was raspy. "Just enough to keep on." Her father had died 2 years ago, crushed under a falling timber while trying to expand the barn. Her mother had faded long before that, a victim of a fever that no doctor could cool. Now, it was just May, the ghosts of her parents, and the land. She walked down to the water, her boots crunching on the dry earth. She knelt and splashed water onto her face. It was a moment of peace, but peace in the territory was a fragile thing, usually shattered before it could fully settle. The sound of buggy wheels crunching on gravel broke the silence. May stiffened. She knew that sound. It was too rhythmic, too heavy to be a neighbor passing by. She stood up, wiping her hands on her apron, and checked the Colt Navy revolver tucked into her belt. It was unloaded bullets cost money she did not have, but the weight of it was a comfort. A black carriage pulled by 2 sweating bays pulled up to her fence line. The man who stepped down did not belong in the dust. Elias Pike was a man of silk vests and polished boots, a creature of boardrooms who had decided to carve a kingdom out of the cactus. He was in his 40s, with a face that was handsome in a predatory way, like a hawk spotting a field mouse. He was the agent for the railroad, the owner of the mercantile, and, for all intents and purposes, the king of Redwater Crossing. Behind him trailed a younger man, clutching a leather satchel as if it contained the crown jewels. "Miss Calloway," Pike said, tipping his hat. His voice was smooth, like oil pouring over gravel. "A fine afternoon, though a bit warm for a lady to be working the field." "Mr. Pike," May replied, not moving from her spot by the cottonwoods. "If you are looking for shade, you won't find much here. If you are looking for water, the trough is by the gate for the horses." Pike chuckled, a sound devoid of humor. Always the sharp tongue. "Your father raised a fighter. I will give him that. But today, I am not here for water. Or at least, not just a drink." He gestured to the young man, who scrambled to open the gate and approached May, pulling a thick sheaf of papers from his bag. "This is Mr. Sterling, a lawyer from Santa Fe," Pike said, stepping onto the porch as if he already owned it. "We have been reviewing the original land grants for this sector. It seems there are irregularities with your father's claim." May felt a cold stone drop into her stomach. "My father paid for this land with his veteran's pension. He had the papers. Papers get lost, Miss Calloway. Boundaries get redrawn. especially when the Union Pacific needs a straight line. Pike smiled, showing teeth that were too white. But I am a reasonable man. The railroad needs a watering depot. Your spring is the only reliable source for 20 miles. We are prepared to offer you a settlement, a generous one. Mr. Sterling thrust the papers toward her. If you would just review the terms, Miss Calloway. It outlines the transfer of deed and the relocation fee. May looked at the papers. To anyone else, they were lines of black ink on white parchment. To May, they were a swarm of ants. They were a tangled knot of nonsensical shapes that mocked her. She saw the loops and the sharp angles, the dense paragraphs that looked like brick walls. Panic, hot and prickly, rose up her neck. She could feel the blood rushing to her ears. This was her greatest shame, the secret she guarded more fiercely than the spring itself. She could skin a rabbit, shoe a horse, and shoot a rattlesnake at 50 paces. But she could not read a single word. She forced her face to remain impassive. She took the papers, her hands trembling slightly. She prayed Pike would attribute the shaking to anger, not fear. She pretended to scan the first page. Her eyes moved left to right, mimicking what she had seen others do. She furrowed her brow, acting as if she were weighing the legal terminology. The sum is listed in Section 4, the lawyer said helpfully, pointing to a block of text. May stared at where his finger pointed. She saw nothing but meaningless scratches. Was it $500, 55? Or was it a clause that said she would leave with nothing but the clothes on her back? I don't sign anything in a rush, May said, her voice tight. She folded the papers, afraid she might be holding them upside down. I need time to study it. Pike's smile faltered. His eyes narrowed. Time is not a commodity the railroad has in abundance. May. The track layers will be at the ridge by next month. This offer is valid for 48 hours. After that, well, the courts can be very unpleasant to squatters without clear titles. I am not a squatter, May said, gripping the papers so hard they crinkled. Get off my land. Elias. Pike stared at her for a long moment. He saw the sweat on her upper lip, the slight tremor in her hand. He mistook it for the weakness of a woman alone. 48 hours, Pike said softly. Don't be a fool, girl. You can't stop the engine. You can only decide if you want to be on the train or under the wheels. He turned and walked back to his carriage. The lawyer scrambled after him. May stood frozen until the dust from their wheels had settled back onto the road. Only then did she sink down onto the porch steps, the papers fluttering to the dirt. She looked at them with hatred. They were a weapon she did not know how to parry. High above the valley, on a ridge of sandstone that looked like the backbone of the earth, Nantan watched the dust cloud from Pike's carriage move back toward the town. He was a shadow against the red rock. He wore the high moccasins of the Apache and a simple cotton shirt that had seen better days. A Winchester rifle rested across his knees, the metal dull and worn. His hair was long, held back by a strip of red cloth, and his face was a mask of hard angles. Nantan was a scout, a watcher for a people who were rapidly running out of places to hide. His name meant spokesman in the tongue of the Dine, but these days he spoke very little. He raised a pair of battered field glasses taken from a dead cavalry officer 3 winters ago, and focused on the small cabin down by the spring. He saw the woman sitting on the steps. He saw the white papers scattered around her boots like fallen leaves. He knew what those papers were. He knew what the black ink symbolized. Agreement, treaty, cession, words that meant theft. Nantan lowered the glasses. His mind drifted back, unwanted, to the mission school in Santa Fe. He remembered the smell of old paper and incense. He remembered the sting of the cane across his palms when he spoke his own language. The friars had taught him their letters. A is for apple, G is for God, L is for land. They had taught him to read so he could understand the Bible. But instead, he had learned to understand their lies. He had read the treaties his elders had signed with X marks. He saw how the words twisted like snakes, promising protection while authorizing slaughter. He had run away when he was 16, burning his school clothes in a dry riverbed. He had returned to the mountains, to the silence, trying to scrub the white man's ink from his soul. But the knowledge remained. It was a scar in his mind. He could read the signs on the telegraph poles. He could read the wanted posters nailed to the trees. He looked back at the town of Redwater Crossing. The Iron Horse was coming. He had seen the surveyors driving their stakes into the sacred earth near the canyon. They wanted the water. The woman at the spring stood in their way. Nantan felt no particular pity for her. She was into White-Eye. Her people were the locusts devouring the land. But he felt a strange kinship with her solitude. She was one small stone in the path of a landslide. "The wolf does not mourn the sheep," he muttered to himself in Apache. "But he hates the rancher." He stood up, slinging the rifle over his shoulder. He would watch a little longer. The town was buzzing with anger. He had cut the telegraph wire 3 nights ago, silencing their metal voice for a day. It was a small sting, but it made the beast angry. And when the beast was angry, it made mistakes. Night fell over Redwater Crossing, bringing no relief from the heat, only a change in the quality of the suffocation. The Silver Dollar Saloon was a cacophony of piano music, clinking glass, and the roar of men who had spent the day swallowing dust. May Calloway moved through the smoke like a ghost. She had traded her work boots for softer shoes and tied a clean apron over her faded blue dress. She worked here 3 nights a week because the farm yielded barely enough to feed herself, let alone pay for tools or seed. 2 whiskeys and a beer, May, Ruby bellowed from behind the bar. Ruby was a woman of immense proportions and an even bigger heart, with hair dyed a violent shade of red that matched the velvet curtains. She was the only person in town who called May honey without looking at her with pity. May balanced the tray, weaving through the tables of miners, railroad workers, and cowboys. The air smelled of stale tobacco and unwashed bodies. At a corner table, Elias Pike held court. He was drinking brandy, surrounded by Sheriff Tom Briggs and a few local cattlemen. "It is not just about the railroad," Pike was saying, his voice carrying over the din. "It is about safety, civilization. We are trying to build a future here, and what do we have? Savages cutting the wires, savages spooking the herds." I heard it was just a windstorm that took the line down." Sheriff Briggs mumbled into his beer. He was a man whose badge seemed too heavy for his shirt. He wanted peace, but he owed Pike too many favors. "Wind don't use wire cutters." "Tom," Pike snapped. "It is that renegade, Nantan, the one who spent time at the mission. He thinks because he knows a few words of English, he can challenge us. He is smart, and that makes him dangerous." May paused near the table, wiping down a spill. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Nantan. She had heard the name. A boogeyman used to frighten children. "We need to secure the water rights at the spring," Pike continued, lowering his voice. "Though not enough. Once the depot is built, we will have a garrison of soldiers here permanently. That will put an end to the Apache problem. But first, we need the land." "May is stubborn," one of the cattlemen said. "Her daddy was stubborn. Stubbornness is a luxury for the rich." Pike sneered. "She will sign. Or she will find that the law has many ways to correct a mistake." He looked up and locked eyes with May. He didn't look away. There was a cold certainty in his gaze, the look of a man who had already counted his winnings before the cards were dealt. May turned away, her hands shaking so hard the empty glasses on her tray rattled. He wasn't just going to take the farm. He was going to use the law, those terrible, indecipherable papers, to crush her. And because she couldn't read them, she wouldn't even know how he did it until it was too late. Later that night, as the saloon was emptying out, Father O'Rourke stopped by the back door where May was untying her apron. The priest was an old man with a face like a dried apple doll and eyes full of weary kindness. "May," he said gently, "I missed you at Sunday service again." Cow broke through the fence. "Father," May lied. The lie came easily, but the shame followed it like a shadow. "Took me half the day to bring her back." "Work is a form of prayer, I suppose," the priest sighed. "But we are starting a new reading circle on Tuesday evenings. For the ladies of the parish, we will be reading the Psalms. I thought you might like to join. It would be good for your soul to read the word directly." May froze. The invitation was meant as a kindness, but it felt like a slap. To sit in a circle of women like Mrs. Miller, who looked down her nose at May's callous hands, and be asked to read aloud. It would be the end of her. They would see her for what she was, a dunce, an ignorant girl pretending to be a woman of property. I can't, Father," May stammered, backing away into the shadows. "The harvest is coming on. The spring needs clearing. I don't have time for books." She saw the disappointment in his eyes. There is always time for God. "May, good night, Father," she whispered, and turned to flee into the dark. The ride home was long and lonely. The moon turned the desert into a landscape of silver and black bone. May didn't light a lantern when she entered her cabin. She didn't want to see the emptiness of the rooms. She sat at the rough-hewn table in the center of the main room. In the center of the table sat the only book in the house, her father's Bible. It was thick, bound in cracked black leather, with trembling fingers. May lit a small kerosene lamp. The yellow light flickered, casting dancing shadows on the log walls. She reached out and opened the book. The pages were thin, like onion skin. They were covered in dense columns of black text. May stared at them. She leaned in close, her nose almost touching the paper. She traced a line with her index finger. She knew in her heart that these marks held stories. She knew they held the words of Jesus, the laws of prophets, the comfort that Father O'Rourke spoke of. But to her, they were silence. They were a locked gate, and she had no key. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking in the empty room. "Just one word. Let me know just one word." She stared until her eyes watered, hoping that by sheer force of will, the shapes would resolve into meaning. But they remained stubborn, alien scratches. She thought of the papers Pike had given her. They were likely sitting on her dresser right now, full of words that would steal her home. She thought of Pike's smug smile. He knew. He might not know for sure, but he smelled the weakness on her. He knew she was defenseless against his world of ink and stamps. Anger, hot and sudden, flared in her chest. She slammed the Bible shut. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet cabin. "Damn them," she hissed. "Damn the letters! Damn the paper!" She stood up and paced the small room. She was trapped by her ignorance, trapped by Pike's greed, trapped by a railroad that wanted to drink her spring dry. And out there in the dark, somewhere in the hills, was the Apache warrior they whispered about. Nantan, a man fighting for his land with fire and steel. May walked to the window and looked out at the barn. She felt a strange envy for the savage. At least he knew who his enemy was. At least he could fight with a rifle. How was she supposed to fight a war waged with words she couldn't understand? She blew out the lamp, plunging the room into darkness. But sleep would be a long time coming. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling through the eaves. It sounded like a train whistle, mournful and approaching fast, bringing with it a future that had no place for a woman who could not read her own name. The morning sun rose over the Arizona territory like a declaration of war. By 8 o'clock, the heat was already rising from the hardpan in shimmering waves, distorting the horizon and turning the distant mesas into floating islands of red rock. It was a dry, suffocating heat that sucked the moisture from the air and left the throat feeling like it was coated in dust. May Calloway stood by the dry trough near the barn, wiping sweat from her brow with her forearm. The pump handle had yielded only a rusty cough of brown mud before falling silent. The well near the house was dangerously low, a casualty of the driest summer in 10 years. She looked toward the ridge where Calloway Spring bubbled up from the deep earth. That water was the only reason she was still here, and the only reason Elias Pike wanted her gone. She harnessed her mare, a sturdy roan with a white blaze on her nose, and loaded the heavy wooden water barrels onto the sledge. The horse huffed, stomping a hoof against the baked earth, sensing the tension in her mistress. "Easy now," May murmured, patting the animal's damp neck. "We just need enough for the garden, just enough to last 2 days." The journey to the spring was not long, but today the silence of the land felt heavy. Usually, The scrub brush was alive with the chitter of lizards or the call of quail. Today, the desert held its breath. The silence pressed against May's ears, thick and unnatural. It was the kind of quiet that usually preceded a storm. Yet the sky was a relentless, cloudless blue. When she reached the grove of cottonwoods that marked the spring, the air felt cooler, but the sense of foreboding deepened. The leaves of the trees hung motionless. May tied the mare to a low branch and unhooked a bucket from the sledge. She stepped toward the water, her boots crunching softly on the gravel. Then she stopped, a few yards from the water's edge. A smear of bright crimson stained the gray sandstone. It looked violent and fresh against the muted colors of the desert. May's hand went instinctively to the knife at her belt. She took a cautious step forward, thinking a coyote or a mountain lion had made a kill near the water. Then she saw the boot. It was not an animal lying in the shadow of the overhang. It was a man. May gasped and stepped back, her heart hammering against her ribs. The figure was sprawled face down in the dirt, motionless. He wore buckskin trousers and a torn calico shirt that was dark with blood. His hair was long and black, matted with sweat and grime. It was an Apache. Every story she had heard in the saloon, every warning shouted from the pulpit by Father O'Rourke, screamed at her to run. They are savages, the town said. They kill without mercy. But the man before her did not look like a monster. He looked broken. May gripped her knife, her knuckles white, but she did not run. Slowly, driven by a curiosity that was stronger than her fear, she crept closer. The man lay still. A rifle lay several feet away from his outstretched hand, useless and out of reach. She circled him, keeping her distance, until she could see his face. He was young, perhaps older than her by 5 years, with high cheekbones and a strong jaw that was currently slack with unconsciousness. A bullet wound tore through his shoulder, angry and swollen. He looked less like the terrifying warrior of Pike's stories and more like a man who had been hunted down like a dog. This was Nantan. She knew it without being told. As she watched, his chest hitched, a shallow, ragged breath escaped his lips. He was alive. May exhaled, realizing she had been holding her breath. She sheathed her knife. The impulse to flee was replaced by a deeply ingrained instinct to help a wounded creature. She stepped forward, reaching out to check the pulse at his neck, before her fingers could brush his skin. A sound cut through the heavy air. It was the thunder of hooves. May froze. She looked toward the rise of the hill. A cloud of red dust was billowing into the sky, moving fast toward the spring. The rhythm was unmistakable. It was a posse. Panic flared in her chest. She looked down at the unconscious Apache, then back at the approaching riders. If they found him here, alive, they would finish what the bullet had started. And if they found her tending to him. The riders crested the hill. Leading them was Elias Pike, sitting tall on a black stallion that looked too expensive for the rough terrain. Beside him rode Sheriff Tom Briggs, looking weary and slumped in his saddle. Behind them were 3 men May recognized from the saloon hired guns who drifted where the money was good. They pulled their horses up sharply near the cottonwoods, the animals dancing and snorting at the scent of fresh blood. Pike looked down at May, his eyes hidden beneath the brim of his hat, then shifted his gaze to the body on the ground. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. "Well now," Pike said, his voice carrying easily over the distance. "It seems fortune favors the righteous. We tracked a wounded coyote for 6 miles, and here he is, curled up at your feet." May stood up slowly, positioning herself between the riders and the fallen man. Her legs felt weak, but she locked her knees to keep from trembling. "He is hurt," May said. Her voice sounded thin in the open air. Pike laughed. It was a dry, dusty sound. "Hurt? He's a dead man walking. Miss Calloway, that acts as a mercy." He swung down from his saddle, his boots thudding onto the earth. He walked toward them, drawing a revolver from the holster at his hip. The metal glinted in the sunlight. Sheriff Briggs dismounted as well, but he stayed back near the horses, his hand resting uneasily on his belt. "Step aside. May," Pike commanded. We will clean up this mess so you can get back to your water. May did not move. She could hear the shallow breathing of the man behind her. She thought of the stories of Apache cruelty, but all she could see right now was the cruelty of the man standing in front of her. Pike did not look like a man dispensing justice. He looked like a man enjoying a slaughter. "He is unarmed," May said, trying to keep her voice steady. "You can't just shoot him in cold blood." "He is an Apache," one of the hired guns shouted from his horse. "That ain't blood, that is poison." Pike stopped a few feet from her. He looked at her with a mixture of amusement and disdain. "You are confused, girl. You think the rules of civilization apply to them. They don't." He burned the rail ties at the canyon. He cost my company thousands of dollars. And you want to talk about cold blood? Pike took another step. "Move. He is breathing," May insisted. "He needs a doctor." Pike's face hardened. The amusement vanished. He stepped close enough that May could smell the bay rum he wore, a sickly sweet scent masking the smell of sweat. "Listen to me closely," Pike said, his voice dropping to a low growl. "You are already treading on thin ice with your land. May, do not add treason to your list of troubles. If you touch that savage, if you offer him so much as a drop of water, you are aiding an enemy of the territory." He leaned in, his eyes boring into hers. "And remember who you are. You are a girl alone, a girl who cannot read the very laws that protect her. Do you think the judge in Santa Fe will listen to you? Do you think the law will stand with an illiterate farm girl who tries to argue legalities with the railroad?" The words hit her like a physical blow. Illiterate. He used the word like a weapon, stripping her of her dignity in front of the sheriff and the hired men. He knew her secret, and he was using it to bind her hands just as surely as a rope. May felt the heat rise in her cheeks. Shame burned in her gut, mixing with fear. She looked at Sheriff Briggs, silently pleading for him to intervene. Briggs looked at the ground, shifting his weight. "Elias," the sheriff said, his voice rough, "if he is dying, maybe we just let nature take its course. No need to make a spectacle in front of the lady." Pike looked at Briggs, then back at May. He saw the fear in her eyes and mistook it for submission. May's mind raced. If she stepped aside, Nantan died. If she fought, she might lose the land, her freedom, perhaps her life. Pike held all the cards. He held the paper, the ink, the words she could not understand. But looking at the fallen man, she realized there was one language Pike did not own. It was the language of the gut, the instinct that said a life was a life. She looked down at Nantan. His eyes were closed. His chest barely moved. She made a choice. It was a choice that would sever her from the safety of her town, from the protection of the law, and from the life she had known. She looked up at Pike, forcing her face into a mask of resignation. "You are right," May lied. The words tasted like ash. "He has stopped moving. I think he is gone." She bent down, pretending to check the body, and deftly pulled the edge of her heavy canvas cloak over Nantan's head and upper body, hiding the faint rise and fall of his chest. "He is dead," May said, standing up. She wiped her hands on her apron as if washing herself of the matter. "Leave him. I will not have you shooting guns near my spring and spooking my horse. I will bury him. Or burn him. Just get off my land." Pike holstered his gun, looking suspicious. He stepped forward and kicked Nantan's boot. The body rocked slightly, but the Apache did not groan. He was too deep in the darkness to feel it. "Dead is best," Pike said. He spat on the ground near Nantan's head. "Saves the county the cost of a rope." He turned his gaze back to May. "You have 48 hours on that contract. May, do not think this distracts me. Prepare your papers. Get someone to read them to you if you must, though I doubt it will change your mind." He signaled to his men. "Let us ride. The air here stinks of savage." Briggs lingered for a second, his eyes meeting May's. There was a question in his gaze, a suspicion that perhaps the Apache wasn't quite dead. But the sheriff looked at Pike's retreating back, then at the girl standing alone against the desolate landscape, and he made his own choice. He turned his horse and followed the money. May stood rigid as statues until the last of the riders disappeared over the ridge and the sound of their hooves faded into the silence of the desert. Only then did she exhale. Her legs gave way, and she sank to her knees beside Nantan. "Do not die," she whispered fiercely, pulling the cloak back from his face. "Do not you dare die here, not after that." She grabbed his good shoulder and shook him gently. There was no response. The sun was climbing higher, and every minute he lay here was a minute closer to death. She could not leave him at the spring. Pike might send someone back to check. She had to move him. May looked at her sledge and the water barrels. She would have to leave one barrel behind to make room. "All right," she said to herself, standing up and rolling her shoulders. "All right." She grasped Nantan under the arms. He was dead weight, heavy with muscle and bone. She gritted her teeth and pulled. Pain shot through her lower back. Her boot slipped in the gravel. She groaned with the effort, dragging him inch by inch toward the sledge. "You are heavy," she panted, sweat stinging her eyes. Getting him onto the low wooden platform of the sledge was a battle. She had to lift his upper body, propping him against the remaining barrel, then heave his legs up. Her face was pressed against his chest for a moment, the smell of copper blood and sage filling her nose. It was an intimacy forced by survival, awkward and desperate. She could feel the heat radiating from his skin. Finally, he was loaded. May collapsed against the wheel for a moment, gasping for air, her dress dark with sweat and streaks of his blood. She looked at her hands. They were trembling uncontrollably. "What have you done, May?" she asked the empty sky. "You have chosen the wrong side." But the sky gave no answer. She climbed onto the driver's seat and snapped the reins. "Giddy up, Sadie. Go home." The ride back to the cabin was a blur of heat and anxiety. Every shadow looked like a gunman. Every rustle of the wind sounded like an accusation. May kept looking back, expecting Nantan to stop breathing, or worse, to wake up and attack her. But he remained still, a dark shape beneath the canvas. When they reached the cabin, May bypassed the front porch and drove the sledge directly into the large barn that stood behind the house. The barn was cool and dim, smelling of dry hay, old leather, and horse feed. Shafts of sunlight pierced through the gaps in the wooden planks, dancing with dust motes. She stopped the horse and hurried to shut the large double doors, plunging the space into semi-darkness. She barred the door with a heavy beam. Safe. For now. She unloaded Nantan with less difficulty this time, letting gravity help her slide him onto a pile of clean straw in the back corner of the barn, behind a stack of unused railroad ties and crates. It was a hidden spot, invisible unless someone searched thoroughly. May fetched a bucket of water from the house, along with a bottle of corn whiskey she kept for toothaches and a bundle of clean rags. Her hands were still shaking as she knelt beside him. She cut the fabric of his shirt away from the wound. The bullet had passed through the fleshy part of the shoulder. It was ugly and angry, but it had missed the bone and the lung. "This is going to hurt," she whispered, though he could not hear her. She poured the whiskey over the wound. Nantan's body jerked violently, a low, guttural groan escaping his throat. His eyes flew open for a second black, unfocused, wild with pain before rolling back as he slumped into unconsciousness again. May jumped back, her heart leaping into her throat. She waited, terrified, but he did not move again. She worked quickly, cleaning the blood and binding the shoulder tightly with strips of white cloth. She wiped the sweat and dirt from his face with a cool rag. In the dim light, stripped of the war paint and the distance of the battlefield, he looked remarkably human. He looked like a man who had a mother, a man who felt pain, a man who was fighting a war he was destined to lose. When she was finished, she covered him with a horse blanket. She sat back on her heels, exhausted. Her own dress was ruined, stained with the blood of the enemy. The realization of her actions settled over her like a heavy cloak. She had lied to the railroad agent. She had deceived the sheriff. She was harboring a fugitive, a man wanted for destroying property and terrorizing the territory. If Pike found out, he wouldn't need a contract to take her land. He would have the law on his side to hang her. May stood up and walked to the barn door, peering through a crack in the wood. The sun was setting, painting the sky in violent shades of purple and bruised orange. The house stood silent across the yard. She felt a strange severance from her old life. Yesterday, she was just May Calloway, the illiterate orphan trying to hold on to her father's farm. Today, she was something else. She was a conspirator. She walked back to the house to wash the blood from her skin, but she knew the stain went deeper than her hands. That night, sleep was impossible. May lay in her narrow bed, staring up at the cracked timber of the ceiling. The silence of the house was amplified by the knowledge of what lay in the barn. She strained her ears, listening through the open window. She could hear the wind sighing through the eaves. She could hear the distant yip of a coyote. And beneath it all, faint and rhythmic, she imagined she could hear the rasping breath of the Apache warrior. She thought of the papers Pike had threatened her with, the black ink that trapped her. And then she thought of Nantan, trapped by a bullet and a world that wanted him dead. "We are both cornered," she whispered into the dark. She turned on her side, clutching the quilt to her chest. She had crossed a line today. There was no going back to the way things were. The inciting incident of her life had happened not with a bang, but with a whisper near a dry spring. She had chosen humanity over safety, and in the merciless West, that was the most dangerous choice of all. Outside, the moon rose high and white, casting long, cold shadows over the barn where the enemy slept, and over the house where the girl lay awake, wondering if she had just saved a life or signed her own death warrant. The morning sun sliced through the gaps in the barn's timber walls, creating bars of dusty gold that cut across the shadows. The air inside was thick with the scent of dried alfalfa, old leather, and the metallic tang of dried blood. May Calloway stood at the heavy double doors, a tin bucket of fresh water in one hand and a bundle of clean linen in the other. She took a breath, steeling herself. Yesterday, she had been a farmer hauling a sack of grain. Today, she was a jailer, a nurse, and a traitor to the territory. She slid the heavy wooden bar aside and slipped through the narrow opening. The interior was dim. Her eyes took a moment to adjust. She looked toward the back corner, behind the stack of railroad ties where she had hidden him. He was awake. Nantan was propped up against a crate, his chest heaving with shallow breaths. His skin was gray beneath a deep tan, slick with a feverish sweat. But his eyes were open. They were black, hard, and focused entirely on her. As May took a step forward, Nantan moved. It was a blur of motion too fast for a dying man. His good hand snatched the hunting knife May had left on a barrel the night before. He held it out, the blade trembling slightly, pointed straight at her throat. May froze. She set the bucket down slowly, the water sloshing over the rim. She could see the fear behind the aggression in his eyes, the cornered animal instinct that expected a bullet or a noose. "I am not going to hurt you," May said, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. She raised her empty hands, showing her palms. "If I wanted you dead, I would have left you at the spring for the buzzards. Or for Pike." Nantan stared at her. The name Pike seemed to register. He lowered the knife an inch, but his muscles remained coiled. He looked at the bandage on his shoulder, then back at her. He seemed to be calculating the odds, measuring her strength against his weakness. "The soldiers," he rasped. His voice was like grinding stones, dry and unused to the language. "Gone," May said. "I told them you were dead. I told them I burned the body." She took a cautious step closer. "You have a fever. That wound needs cleaning, or the infection will kill you faster than any soldier." Nantan watched her approach. The suspicion didn't leave his eyes, but the energy seemed to drain out of him. The knife lowered until the tip rested on his knee. He was exhausted. The fight had left him, replaced by a grudging necessity. "Why?" he asked. One word, heavy with accusation. "Because I do not like seeing things die that do not have to," May replied simply. She knelt beside him, the smell of fever and copper filling her nose. "Now, Give me the knife! He hesitated, his fingers white around the handle. Then, slowly, he turned the hilt toward her. It was a surrender, a truce. I will not give you to them, May said, taking the weapon and sliding it out of reach. Not unless you give me a reason to. Nantan leaned his head back against the crate, closing his eyes for a moment. You saved me, he murmured, the rhythm of his speech halting. I will not cause harm. May nodded, accepting the pact. She dipped a cloth into the cool water. Let me see the shoulder. She peeled back the blood-stiffened shirt. The wound was angry and red. The flesh puckered around the hole where the bullet had passed through. As she worked, cleaning away the dried blood, Nantan did not flinch, though his jaw muscles bunched tight enough to snap. There was a strange intimacy in the silence. May's hands, pale and rough from farm work, moved over his dark, scarred skin. She could feel the heat radiating from him. She was acutely aware of his breathing, the rise and fall of his chest, the raw masculinity of him that was so different from the soft, doughy men of the town. It was terrifying, and yet it made the air in the barn feel thin and electric. She finished wrapping the fresh linen around his torso. Her fingers brushed against his collarbone, and for a second, his eyes opened and locked with hers. It was a look of shared vulnerability, two people who had seen the worst of the world and were surprised to find mercy in a barn. May pulled her hand back quickly, her face flushing. Rest, she commanded, standing up abruptly. I will bring food when it is dark. She hurried out of the barn, the sensation of his skin still burning on her fingertips. The afternoon brought the wind, and with it, Sheriff Tom Briggs. May was chopping wood near the porch when she saw his horse plodding up the drive. Her stomach twisted. Had Pike sent him back? Had they found the blood trail? Briggs didn't dismount. He looked tired, his hat pulled low against the sun. He held out a thick brown envelope. Afternoon. May, he said, his voice lacking its usual warmth. Pike sent this over from the law office. Said the 48 hours are ticking. May wiped her hands on her apron and took the envelope. It felt heavy, like a brick. He said it is a revised agreement, Briggs continued, looking out toward the horizon rather than at her face. Said he made the terms clearer. Wants you to read it over carefully and sign it. He will be back tomorrow evening for the answer. Tomorrow, May asked, her voice tight. He said 2 days. Pike is an impatient man. May, and the railroad waits for no one. Briggs looked down at her then, his expression softening with pity. Look, May, I know you loved your daddy, but you cannot fight money like this. Read the papers. Take the deal. Move somewhere safer. This land. It is just dirt. It is my dirt, May said, clutching the envelope to her chest. Just read it, Briggs said, turning his horse. Do not be stubborn. He rode away, leaving May standing in the swirling dust. She looked down at the envelope. Read it. The command mocked her. She tore it open, her hands shaking. Inside were 3 sheets of crisp, expensive paper covered in dense, spidery handwriting. There were stamps and seals that looked official and threatening. She stared at the first line. The letters marched across the page like soldiers black. Uniform. Impenetrable. She recognized the letter P for Pike. She recognized M for May, but the rest was a tangled web of loops and lines that swam before her eyes. Was it a fair offer? Was it an eviction notice? Was it a confession? She felt tears prick her eyes hot, angry tears of frustration. She looked around to make sure no one was watching, then crushed the papers against her skirt. From the dark slit in the barn wall, a pair of sharp black eyes watched her. Nantan saw the way she held the paper not like a tool, but like an enemy. He saw her eyes darting across the page without rhythm. The way she didn't turn to the second sheet. He saw the shame that slumped her shoulders. That night, the wind howled around the corners of the cabin, rattling the window panes. May couldn't stand the silence of the house, nor the accusing stare of the unread papers on her table. She took the lantern and the envelope and went to the barn. Nantan was sitting up, eating the corn stew she had left earlier. The fever seemed to have broken, leaving him weak but clear-headed. The lantern light cast long, dancing shadows against the walls, creating a small island of gold in the vast darkness. May sat on an upturned bucket a few feet away. She didn't speak. She just held the papers in her lap, staring at them as if she could force them to yield their secrets by sheer will. "The sheriff brought news?" Nantan asked quietly. May jumped slightly. She hadn't expected him to speak first. "Just legal matters, land business." "Bad business," Nantan observed. "Your face is heavy." "It is complicated," May said defensively. "Legal words, lawyers talk in circles." Nantan set his bowl down. He watched her for a long moment. "The marks," he said, pointing a long finger at the paper. "What do they say?" May stiffened. "I told you, it is about the land." "Read it to me," Nantan challenged softly. "I want to know what the white man thinks this land is worth." May looked down at the page. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She cleared her throat. She pretended to scan the lines. It says they offer $500, she lied, her voice trembling. "It says I can keep the mineral rights, and they will build a fence." She looked up. Nantan was staring at her, his expression unreadable. But there was a softness in his eyes she hadn't seen before. He leaned forward, wincing slightly as his shoulder pulled. "The paper is upside down, May," he said gently. The silence that followed was deafening. May looked down. Indeed, the dense block of text was inverted, the seal of the territory at the bottom instead of the top. The blood rushed to her face so fast it made her dizzy. The shame was a physical pain, a crushing weight that made her want to curl into a ball and disappear. She had been caught, stripped bare. The warrior had seen the one thing she hid from the world. She dropped the papers as if they burned her hands. She turned her face away, biting her lip to keep it from quivering. "I can't read," she whispered. The confession hung in the air, fragile and terrifying. "I never learned. My father, there was never time. And then he died. And now—" Her voice broke. "Now they are going to take everything because I am stupid." She waited for the laughter. She waited for the scorn. Instead, she heard the rustle of straw. Nantan moved closer. He reached out and picked up the papers. He smoothed them out with his good hand. "Not stupid," he said. His voice was a low rumble, devoid of judgment. "Blind. You are blind to the ink." He looked at her, and his face softened into a smile, a rare, genuine expression that transformed his harsh features. "I will teach letters," he said softly. "You will teach me patience." May looked at him, stunned. You know how to read." "The mission school," Nantan said, his face darkening for a brief second before clearing. "The priests believed God lived in the alphabet. I hated it, but I learned it is a weapon. May, a silent arrow." He shifted closer, until his knee almost brushed hers. The space between them seemed to shrink, filled with the warmth of the lantern and the sudden, overwhelming connection of two outcasts finding common ground. "Show me," May whispered. Nantan placed the paper on the crate between them. He pointed to the top of the page. "Here," he said. He took her hand. His skin was rough, calloused from the bow in the rain, but his touch was incredibly gentle. He guided her index finger to the large, ornate letter at the start of the paragraph. "This is W," he said. "Like water, like wind." May watched his finger guide hers. She could feel the heat of his hand seeping into hers. She could smell the scent of sage and wood smoke on him. Her breath hitched. "W," she repeated. "Yes." He moved her finger to the next letter. "H, like horse or heart." He looked at her then. Their faces were inches apart, in the golden light. She saw the flecks of amber in his black eyes. She saw the pulse beating in his throat. The lesson was about letters, but the subtext was something entirely different. It was a bridging of worlds. It was an intimacy that was more dangerous than any gunfight. "Why are you helping me?" May asked, her voice barely audible. Because the hawk does not mock the bird with a broken wing, Nantan said softly, and because you did not leave me to die. For the next hour, the barn became a schoolroom, but it was a schoolroom charged with a tension that made May's skin prickle. They sat shoulder to shoulder, their heads bent over the hated papers. Nantan taught her A, B, and C. He showed her how to recognize the shape of her own name, Calloway. He made her trace it in the dust on the floor until she got the curve of the C right. When she stumbled, pronouncing L with too much force, he chuckled a low, warm sound. Softly, he corrected, touching her lips briefly with his fingertip to show the shape. Like a whisper, not a kick. May laughed, a nervous, breathless sound. She told him about the town, about Mrs. Miller's judgmental stare, about the way Pike looked at her like she was a prize mare to be broken. She told him things she had never told anyone. In return, Nantan listened. He didn't just hear, he listened with the stillness of a hunter. He was learning patience, just as he promised. He was learning that not all white people were the storm. Some were just the grass bending beneath it. Now, Nantan said, his face growing serious, let us see what the snake Pike has really written. He pulled the contract closer. He read slowly, his brow furrowing as he deciphered the dense legal jargon. He traced the lines, whispering the words in English, then translating the meaning into concepts they both understood. Suddenly, his fingers stopped. His eyes narrowed. A low growl rumbled in his chest. What is it? May asked, alarm spiking in her chest. He lies, Nantan said, his voice hard as flint. He told the sheriff $500. Yes, the paper says $50, Nantan said. $50 for the relocation. May gasped. $50 wouldn't even buy a mule and a wagon to leave. And here, Nantan continued, tapping a paragraph near the bottom. Clause of water rights. It says you surrender the spring immediately upon signing. But it also says, he squinted, it says the railroad is not liable for existing structures. They do not have to pay for the house or the barn. They can burn them. He looked up at May. And this, transfer of guardianship, because you are a female and unmarried. This paper appoints Pike as the executor of the estate until the sale is final. May felt the blood drain from her face. He wants to own me. He wants to take the land for nothing, burn my home, and make himself my legal guardian so I cannot sue him. It is a trap, Nantan said. Not a sale, a trap. May stared at the paper. For the first time, she didn't just see black marks. She saw the teeth of the trap. He knew, she whispered. He knew I couldn't read it. He handed me my own death warrant and told me to sign it. A cold fury replaced the shame. It started in her gut and spread to her limbs, steadying her shaking hands. Pike wasn't just a businessman. He was a predator. And he wasn't just after the water. He was after her complete destruction because it was cheaper than being fair. She looked at Nantan. The Apache warrior was no longer the enemy. The man who had tried to kill her people was sitting here, decoding the language of her own people to save her. The pen, May said bitterly. It cuts deeper than the knife. But now you see the blade, Nantan said. A seen blade can be dodged. The wind outside picked up, howling like a banshee. The temperature in the barn dropped, but neither of them moved away from the other. May reached out and pulled the blanket tighter around Nantan's shoulders. As she tucked the wool around him, her face was close to his neck. She could smell the rain coming on the wind, mixed with his scent. She paused. Nantan turned his head. His nose brushed against her cheek. It was an accidental touch. Or perhaps not accidental at all. For a heartbeat, the world stopped. The war, the railroad, the debt had all vanished. There was just the man and the woman, the firelight, and the sudden, terrifying realization that she wanted to lean into him. She wanted to rest her head against his good shoulder and let him hold up the sky for a moment. Nantan's eyes searched hers. He raised his hand slowly, as if approaching a skittish deer, and brushed a stray lock of hair from her forehead. His thumb lingered on her temple. You are strong, May Calloway, he whispered. Stronger than ink. May's breath caught in her throat. She closed her eyes, leaning almost imperceptibly into his touch. It was forbidden. It was madness, but it felt like the only true thing in her life. Suddenly, Nantan stiffened. His hand dropped from her face. His head snapped toward the door. "What?" May whispered, opening her eyes. "Hush," he commanded. He listened, his body rigid. May heard nothing but the wind. But Nantan heard something else. A high, oscillating cry drifted on the wind. To May, it sounded like a coyote yipping at the moon. "My people," Nantan said, his voice urgent. "Scouts, they are signaling." He looked at May, the tenderness gone, replaced by the warrior's edge. "The bluecoats, the cavalry. They are not gone. They are circling. They are coming to sweep the valley." May felt the cold dread wash over her. "Here, to the farm. If they find tracks—" "Yes," Nantan struggled to stand, clutching his shoulder. "And Pike. Pike will use them. If he cannot cheat you out of the land, he will let the soldiers burn you out to get to me." The bubble of their private world burst. The reality of the frontier crashed back in. "We have to be ready," May said, standing up and blowing out the lantern to hide them in the darkness. "We have 48 hours with Pike, but the soldiers might not wait that long." "No," Nantan said in the dark, his voice close to her ear. "We do not have hours. We have only until the wind changes." They stood together in the blackness of the barn. Two outcasts bound by a secret and a lie, waiting for the storm that was about to break over Callaway Spring. May reached out and found his hand in the dark. She squeezed it, hard. He squeezed back. It was a promise. Whatever was coming, they would face it together. The dawn broke over the high desert with a deceptively fragile beauty. The sky was a bruised purple that slowly bled into a pale, hard blue, revealing the jagged silhouette of the mesas to the east. May Callaway stood at her kitchen window, a tin cup of bitter coffee in her hand, staring out at the ridge that overlooked Callaway Spring. They were there again. 3 shadows on horseback, motionless against the brightening sky. They did not move, did not descend, and did not hide. They simply watched. May felt a cold prickle of unease trace the line of her spine. She set the cup down and checked the load in her father's revolver before tucking it into the deep pocket of her apron. She walked out to the barn, her boots crunching softly on the frost-hardened earth. Inside the barn, Nantan was already awake. He was standing near the gap in the wall, peering through a knot in the wood. He moved with less stiffness today, though his left arm was still bound tight against his chest. "They are still there," May said, her voice low. "They are judging," Nantan replied without turning. "They are deciding if this house is a cage or a fortress. They are your people. They are the eyes of the tribe," Nantan said. He turned to look at her, his face grim. "They know I am here. They track the blood. Now they wait to see if I come out, or if you have sold me to the soldiers." "I have not sold you to anyone," May snapped, the lack of sleep fraying her nerves. "I know," Nantan said softly, "but they do not know you. May Callaway. To them. You are White Eye. You are the enemy." The morning dragged on, the tension stretching tight like a wire fence. Around noon, the stillness broke. The 3 riders on the ridge began to descend, picking their way carefully down the scree slopes toward the farmhouse. May grabbed her Winchester rifle from the hook by the door. "Stay inside," she commanded. "No," Nantan said. He picked up a heavy piece of oak wood, using it as a makeshift staff to support his weight. "If I hide, they will think I am a prisoner. I must meet them standing." They walked out onto the porch together. The sun was high now, bleaching the color from the ground. The 3 Apache riders stopped 20 yards from the fence. They were heavily armed, carrying rifles and bows, their faces painted with stripes of white clay. The leader rode a roan Mustang. He was an older man, his face a map of deep canyons and hard years. His hair was streaked with gray, and his eyes were dark pools that gave away nothing. "That is Yaslin," Nantan whispered. "He is an elder." a war leader. Yaslin looked at Nantan, then at May, and finally at the rifle in May's hands. May lowered the barrel until it pointed at the dirt, but she did not uncock the hammer. Yaslin spoke in a guttural, flowing language that sounded like stones tumbling in a river. Nantan answered, his voice respectful but firm. The conversation went back and forth, the tone shifting from accusation to explanation. Then Yaslin switched to a halting, heavily accented English, his eyes locking onto May. "He says you pulled him from the death sleep," Yaslin said. "He says you hid him from the blue coats and the fat man." "I did," May said, her chin lifted. "He was bleeding on my land. I do not let things die on my land if I can help it." Yaslin studied her. "Why, you are he is Apache. We are at war." "The war is out there," May said, pointing toward the horizon. "In here, he was just a man with a hole in his shoulder." A flicker of surprise passed through the old warrior's eyes. He looked back at Nantan and spoke again in their tongue. Nantan nodded, his expression pained. "What did he say?" May asked. Nantan did not look at her. "He says I may stay until the moon turns full, until the shoulder can bear the weight of a bow, but then I must choose." "Choose what?" "To return to the people and fight," Nantan said, his voice heavy. "Or to walk my own path alone. If I stay with the white world, I am dead to the tribe." May felt a hollow ache in her chest. She realized with a sudden sharp clarity that she had foolishly allowed herself to imagine a future where he simply stayed in the barn forever, safe and hidden. But the world outside was demanding a verdict. Yaslin pulled his horse around. 2 days, the old man said to Nantan in English. "Then the path splits." He looked at May one last time. "You have courage, woman of the spring, but courage attracts lightning." With that, the Apache riders turned and galloped back toward the hills, disappearing into the heat haze. May and Nantan stood in silence. The ultimatum hung between them. He had to leave, and if he went back to his people, he went back to the war that would likely kill him. If he stayed, there was no place for him here. Not in a town owned by Elias Pike. "We should check the bandages," May said finally, her voice dull. She turned back to the house, unable to meet his eyes. The reprieve lasted only 3 hours. In the late afternoon, the sound of carriage wheels and heavy hooves shattered the quiet. May was in the garden, hoeing rows of withered corn. She looked up to see Elias Pike's black carriage, flanked by 4 hired guns on horseback. They did not stop at the gate this time. They rode straight into the yard, kicking up clouds of choking dust. May ran to the porch, placing herself between the men and the barn. Pike stepped down from the carriage. He was wearing a fresh linen suit that looked obscenely clean against the backdrop of dust and struggle. He took a handkerchief from his pocket and dabbed his upper lip. "Inspection time, Miss Calloway," Pike announced breezily. "I did not invite you," May said, gripping the hoe like a weapon. "And the 48 hours are not up until sundown tomorrow." "Ah, but the situation has changed," Pike said, walking toward her. "There have been reports. Disturbing reports." "What reports?" "Neighbors." Pike lied smoothly. "They claim to have heard noises at night, strange movements, and one of my men found tracks near the ridge. Unshod ponies, Apache tracks." He signaled to his men. 2 of them dismounted and began walking toward the barn. Panic seized May's throat. "Get away from there," she shouted, stepping forward. Pike blocked her path. He was taller than her, and for the first time, he used his size to intimidate. He loomed over her, smelling of bay rum and stale cigars. "Calm down, May," he said, his voice dropping to a menacing purr. "We are just ensuring your safety. Unless, of course, you have a reason to not want us looking in your barn." May's hand went to the pocket of her apron, her fingers brushing the cold metal of the revolver. She calculated the odds. 4 men with rifles, Pike with a derringer likely hidden in his vest. She had 6 shots. "There is nothing in there but a sick horse and some feed," May said, willing her voice not to tremble. "You are trespassing, Elias." One of the men reached the barn doors. He lifted the heavy wooden bar. May stopped breathing. The man swung the door open. Sunlight flooded the dark interior. The man stepped in, kicked at a pile of hay, and looked around the empty stalls. He walked to the back, peering behind the stack of railroad ties. May closed her eyes, waiting for the shout. "Nothing here, Mr. Pike," the man called out. "Just rats and straw." May opened her eyes, light-headed with relief. Nantan must have buried himself deep in the hayloft or squeezed into the crawl space beneath the floorboards. Pike looked disappointed. He turned his cold gaze back to May. "Well," he said, adjusting his cuffs, "it seems you are lucky. This time." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded document. "Since I am here, let us discuss the inevitable. I have a new offer, a final offer." He held the paper out. "Sign the deed. May, transfer the water rights and the land to the Pacific Railroad Company. In exchange, I will personally guarantee your safety. I will hire men to guard this house from the savages. And I will secure you a position at the boarding house in town. You will have a salary, a warm bed, safety." "And if I do not?" May asked. Pike leaned in close, his voice a whisper of venom. "Then I will have to assume that the rumors are true, that you are sympathetic to the enemy. There is a law against aiding hostiles. May, it is called treason. The penalty is hanging." He smiled, but his eyes were dead. "Think about it. A job and a warm bed. Or a rope and a shallow grave. You are a smart girl, even if you cannot read the words that seal your fate." He tucked the paper into her apron pocket, his hand lingering intimately against her hip for a second too long. May flinched away. "Sundown tomorrow." "May," Pike called out as he climbed back into his carriage, "do not make me bring the marshal." The cavalcade turned and rode out, leaving silence in their wake. May stood on the porch until her legs began to shake uncontrollably. She pulled the paper from her pocket and crumpled it in her fist. She stormed into the barn. "Come out," she hissed. A pile of hay in the loft shifted, and Nantan dropped down, landing lightly on his feet despite his injury. He looked at her, his face stoic. "He knows," May said, her voice rising in hysteria. "He does not know where you are, but he knows something is wrong. He threatened to hang me. Nantan, he threatened to hang me for treason." "I heard," Nantan said calmly. "You heard," May threw the crumpled paper at him. "Is that all you have to say? I am standing between you and a rope, and all you do is hide in the hay." "I held my knife," Nantan said, his voice hard. "If he had touched you, he would be dead." "And then what?" May shouted. "Then the whole town comes and burns the place down. You bring death with you." "Nantan, Pike was right. I should never have touched you." The words hung in the air, cruel and sharp. May instantly regretted them, but the fear was talking. The sheer, overwhelming terror of a woman who had been pushed into a corner. Nantan flinched as if she had struck him. He looked down at the crumpled paper on the dirt floor. "It is not I who brings death," he said quietly. "It is the Iron Road. It is the greed of men like Pike. I am just the excuse he uses to take what he wants from you. If I were not here, he would find another reason. He would say your fence is wrong. He would say your father owed debts." He looked up at her, his eyes burning. "Do not blame the arrow for the hand that fires it." May crumbled. The anger drained out of her, leaving only exhaustion. She sank down onto a bale of hay and buried her face in her hands. "I do not know what to do," she sobbed. "I cannot fight them. I am just one woman, and I cannot read their laws to stop them." She felt a weight settle beside her. Nantan sat down. He did not touch her, but his presence was a solid, warm anchor in the storm. "You are not just one woman," he said. "You are May Calloway. You pulled a warrior from the rocks. You stood before a war chief and did not blink." He reached out and picked up the paper she had thrown. He smoothed it out on his knee. "We will fight them," Nantan said. "Not with bows. Not yet. We will fight them with this." He tapped the paper. That night, the barn was lit by the soft glow of the kerosene lantern. The wind battered the walls outside, screaming of an approaching storm. But inside, the world had narrowed to 2 people and a sheet of paper. "Read it again," Nantan commanded gently. May wiped her eyes. She stared at the paper. Nantan had spent the last hour breaking down the letters, making her sound out the syllables. I accept the sum of $50. May read, her voice halting. "And surrender all claims." "Good," Nantan said. "Now read the bottom part, the small letters." May squinted. Subject to federal review." "Yes," Nantan said, a smile touching his lips. "Federal review. That means Pike cannot take the land instantly. He has to send the paper to Santa Fe. It takes time, weeks." "But he said 48 hours, May said, looking up. "He lied," Nantan said. "He relies on your fear. He relies on you not knowing the words." May looked at the paper. The black marks were no longer enemies. They were tools, clumsy tools in her hands. Yes, but tools nonetheless. She looked at Nantan. He was sitting close to her, his shoulder brushing hers. The harsh lines of his face were softened by the lantern light. She felt a sudden, overwhelming surge of gratitude. And something else. Something that made her heart beat faster than the fear ever had. I'm sorry," she whispered. "For what I said earlier. Fear makes us say things we do not mean," Nantan said. He reached out and brushed a smudge of ink from her cheek. His hand lingered there. His palm was warm and rough against her skin. May turned her face slightly into his hand. She looked at his lips, then up to his eyes. The air between them crackled. It was a magnetic pull, the inevitable collision of 2 lonely souls who had found recognition in the other. "You are teaching me," she whispered. "And you are teaching me," he replied, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "Patience is hard. I want to ride out and put an arrow in Pike's heart. But I sit here because of you." He leaned in. May's breath hitched. She did not pull away. His face was inches from hers. She could see the faint scar on his upper lip. She could feel the heat of his body. It was a moment suspended in time, fragile and perfect. "May," he breathed. Suddenly, the barn door creaked. They sprang apart, hearts racing. Nantan grabbed his knife. May grabbed the lantern. A figure slipped through the crack in the door. It was not Pike. It was not a soldier. It was Yaslin. The old warrior looked like a ghost, dripping with the rain that had started to fall outside. He moved silently to the center of the barn. "The wind has changed," Yaslin said in English, his voice grim. "What is it?" Nantan asked. Standing up. "The bluecoats," Yaslin said. "Not just a patrol, a regiment. They are coming from the fort. They have cannons." May stood up, clutching the paper. "Cannons? Why?" "Pike." Yaslin spat the name. "He sent a rider to the fort. He told the colonel that the Apache have massed at Callaway Spring. He told them we have a fortress here. He lied to bring the army down on this house." Nantan looked at May. "He wants to burn you out. He does not care about the treaty. He wants the army to clear the land for him so he can lay his tracks over the ashes." "When will they be here?" May asked, her voice steady now. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. "Tomorrow," Yaslin said. "Before the sun is high." Nantan looked at Yaslin. "Will the tribe fight?" "We are few," Yaslin said. "If we fight the cannons in the open, we die. We must retreat to the deep canyons." He looked at Nantan. "Come with us, Nantan. If you stay here, you die with the white woman." Nantan looked at Yaslin. Then he turned and looked at May. He looked at the woman who had dragged him through the dust. He looked at the paper in her hand. He looked at the home her father had built. "No," Nantan said. "I do not run." Yaslin stared at him for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "You have chosen your path." The old warrior vanished into the night as quickly as he had come. May and Nantan were alone again. The rain hammered against the roof, sounding like 1,000 drum beats. "They are bringing an army," May said. "We cannot fight an army, Nantan. We cannot fight them with guns alone." Nantan agreed. He paced the floor, his mind working. Pike used a lie to bring them here. He used words to create a war. He stopped and looked at May. We must use the truth to stop them. The truth, May laughed bitterly. Who will listen to us? The colonel, Nantan said. Soldiers follow orders, but officers follow paper. Pike has twisted the law, but if we can show them the real law, if we can prove he is lying— I cannot read enough to prove anything yet, May said. But you can read enough to stall them, Nantan said. And I can fight long enough to give you the chance to speak. He walked over to her and took her hands. May, tomorrow, the world comes to your door. We make a stand, here, on your land. May looked down at their joined hands, one pale, one bronze, two worlds interlaced. Okay, she whispered. We stand. She squeezed his hand. But if we are going to do this, Nantan, teach me one more word tonight. What word? Hope, she said. Nantan smiled, a fierce, wild expression. That is the hardest word to learn, but it is the only one that matters. Outside, the storm raged, a prelude to the violence that the morning would bring. But inside the barn, amidst the smell of hay and impending danger, a plan was forming, a plan born of ink and blood, a plan to turn the weapon of the oppressor back upon him. They would meet the cavalry not as victims, but as the owners of the truth. The noon sun hung directly overhead, a white-hot disk that bleached the color from the Arizona landscape. The air was still, heavy with the scent of dried sage and the electric tension that precedes a lightning strike. May Calloway stood on her porch, her hand shading her eyes, watching the cloud of dust that was rolling toward her from the direction of Redwater Crossing. It was not just a carriage this time. It was a column. Through the haze, the brass buttons of the United States Cavalry glinted like sparks. The sound of a bugle, short and sharp, cut through the silence, announcing their arrival with a terrifying officiality. They are here, May whispered, her throat dry. Behind her, in the shadows of the doorway, Nantan leaned against the frame. He had traded his makeshift crutch for his rifle. His face was painted with a streak of white clay across the bridge of his nose, the mark of a man prepared to die. Stay inside until I signal, May commanded, her voice trembling slightly. Do not let them take you, Nantan replied, his voice a low rumble. If they take you, the house falls. The column rumbled into the yard. There were 20 soldiers in blue wool uniforms, their faces slick with sweat and grime. Leading them was a young lieutenant with stiff posture and a saber at his hip. Beside him, looking triumphant, rode Elias Pike on his black stallion, flanked by 6 of his hired guns. The lieutenant raised a gloved hand, and the column halted. The horses stamped and snorted, smelling the water from the spring and the fear radiating from the house. Miss May Calloway, the lieutenant called out. He had a refined Eastern accent that sounded out of place among the cactus. I am her, May said, stepping down from the porch. She kept her hands visible, wiping them on her apron to hide the shaking. Pike spurred his horse forward, cutting off the officer. There she is, Lieutenant, the woman I told you about, bewitched by the savages, harboring a fugitive who has been terrorizing the railroad. The lieutenant looked at Pike with a flicker of annoyance, then turned his gaze back to May. Ma'am, I am Lieutenant Evans of the 4th Cavalry. Mr. Pike has sworn an affidavit stating that you are sheltering a hostile Apache warrior known as Nantan. We have orders to secure the prisoner. This is my land, May said, standing tall. You have no right to march an army onto my property based on the word of a liar. Pike laughed, a harsh, grating sound. A liar, I'm a representative of the Pacific Railroad. Girl, and you are a spinster farming dirt. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a rolled parchment. And we do not need your permission. We have a warrant, signed by the territorial judge this very morning. It grants us the right to search every inch of this property and seize any contraband. He waved the paper in the air. A white flag of authority? Show it to her if you like. Lieutenant, though we both know reading is not Miss Calloway's strong suit, She wouldn't know a warrant from a grocery list. Pike smirked at his own joke, and his hired men chuckled. The shame burned May's cheeks, hot and familiar. But this time, beneath the shame, there was something else. There was the memory of a lantern in a dark barn. There was the memory of a rough finger tracing a letter in the dust. A seen blade can be dodged. "Let me see it," May said. Pike blinked. The lieutenant looked surprised. "I said, let me see the warrant," May repeated, stepping forward and extending her hand. Pike hesitated, his eyes narrowing. He exchanged a glance with the sheriff, who was lurking at the back of the group. "Don't waste the lieutenant's time. May, you can't read it." "If I cannot read it, then it does no harm to let me hold it," May challenged. Lieutenant Evans gestured impatiently. "Give her the paper, Mr. Pike. It is her right." Reluctantly, Pike thrust the scroll at her. "Make it quick." May unrolled the paper. The sunlight hit the white surface, blindingly bright. For a second, panic seized her. The letters swam. The black ink looked like tangled wire. "I can't do this," she thought. "I'm just a girl who guesses." Then she heard Nantan's voice in her head. "Patience. Look for the shapes." She took a deep breath. She focused on the top of the page. She saw the big, ornate letter. T. Next to it, R-A-N-S, trans, transfer. She scanned down. She skipped the words she didn't know. She looked for the ones she had practiced in the dirt. P-R-O-P-E-R-T-Y, property, T-I-T-L-E, title. And there, near the bottom, where the judge's signature should have been, was a stamp she recognized from the crates in the barn. It was not a court seal. It was the seal of the railroad company. May looked up. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. But her eyes were clear. "This is not a warrant," May announced, her voice ringing out across the yard. The silence that followed was absolute. "Excuse me," Lieutenant Evans asked, leaning forward in his saddle. "This is not a warrant," May said louder. Holding the paper up, she pointed to the top line. "It says, transfer of property." She looked directly at Pike. "And here, it says, title, deed." Pike's face went the color of a beet. "She is lying. She is making it up. She is illiterate. Lieutenant, everyone in town knows it." "I am reading what is written," May shouted back. She walked toward the lieutenant's horse and thrust the paper up at him. "Read it." "He is trying to trick you. He wants you to clear the land so he can steal it." Lieutenant Evans snatched the paper. He scanned it quickly. His expression darkened. His jaw tightened. He looked from the paper to Pike, his eyes cold. "Mr. Pike," Evans said, his voice dangerously low. "This is a standard quitclaim deed. This is not a search warrant signed by a judge." It must be the wrong paper," Pike stammered, sweat breaking out on his forehead. "My clerk, he must have mixed up the files. You brought the United States Cavalry out here on a lie," Evans demanded. "You used my men as your personal eviction squad." "She has an Apache in there," Pike screamed, losing his composure. "Does it matter what paper I used? She is harboring a savage. Arrest her, burn the barn. I take my orders from the Department of War, not from the railroad." Evans snapped. "Troops, stand down." The soldiers lowered their carbines. The tension in the yard shifted. Pike looked around, realizing his legal trap had snapped shut on his own fingers. He looked at May with pure, unadulterated hatred. "You think you are clever?" Pike hissed, his hand dropping to the holster at his hip. "You think because you learned a few words you can stop the future? I will bury you in this dust. You stupid cow. Watch your hand." "Pike," Evans warned. But the warning came too late. Or perhaps it was exactly what one of Pike's hired guns was waiting for. From the cluster of Pike's men, a nervous horse sidestepped. A man named Skinner, a drifter with a twitchy eye and a reputation for violence, saw the lieutenant turning on his boss. He saw his payday evaporating. Skinner raised his rifle. "He's in the barn, I see him." Skinner fired. The crack of the rifle shot shattered the afternoon. The bullet went wide, striking the wooden post of the porch inches from May's head. Splinters sprayed into her hair. Chaos erupted. The cavalry horses panicked, rearing and wheeling. The soldiers, trained to react to fire, scrambled to bring their carbines up, unsure of where the threat was coming from. "Apaches on the ridge," someone shouted. From the rocky hillside overlooking the farm, a puff of white smoke appeared. Yaslin and his scouts, watching the scene unfold, saw the shot fired at the woman. They answered. An arrow struck the ground near Pike's horse. A rifle shot from the hill hit the dirt near the lieutenant. "Take cover," Evans roared. Defensive positions. May didn't wait. She turned and sprinted for the low stone wall that surrounded the vegetable garden near the spring. It was the only cover between the house and the open ground. "May, get down!" Nantan vaulted over the porch railing. He hit the ground running, his injury forgotten in the surge of adrenaline. He grabbed May by the waist and threw her behind the stone wall just as a volley of gunfire chewed up the dirt where she had been standing. They huddled together behind the rocks. The air was instantly filled with the deafening roar of battle. Gunsmoke drifted over the yard, acrid and choking. "You read it," Nantan yelled over the noise, a fierce grin breaking through his pain. "You read the paper." "I did," May gasped, clutching her revolver. "But they are shooting anyway." "Words start the war," Nantan said, checking the load in his Winchester. "But bullets finish it. Stay low." The farm had become a battlefield. The soldiers had dismounted and were taking cover behind their horses and the water trough, firing up at the ridge where Yaslin's men were hidden. Pike's men, however, were not looking at the ridge. They were looking at the garden wall. Pike had retreated behind his carriage. He was screaming orders at his men. "Forget the hill. Get the girl. Kill the Apache. Burn them out." Bullets chipped away at the sandstone wall protecting May and Nantan. Stone fragments rained down on them. "We are pinned," May cried. "They are flanking," Nantan said, pointing to the left. Through the haze, May saw two of Pike's men creeping through the tall grass near the barn, trying to circle around their position. If they reached the side of the barn, they would have a clear shot at Nantan's back. Nantan raised his rifle and fired. One of the men dived for cover behind a barrel, but the other kept moving. "I cannot get the angle," Nantan cursed, trying to shift his position. He hissed in pain as his wounded shoulders slammed against the rock. The flanking gunman, a man in a dusty duster, popped up. He raised his pistol, aiming squarely at Nantan's exposed back. Time seemed to slow down for May. She saw the gunman's grin. She saw the black bore of the pistol. She saw Nantan struggling to turn. She looked at the revolver in her hand. It was heavy. It was a tool of death that she had always hated. But in that frozen second, she realized that innocence was a luxury she could no longer afford. "If I do nothing, he dies." May stood up. She did not think about the Bible. She did not think about the law. She thought about the man who had taught her that W was for water. She leveled the Colt Navy. She didn't aim with her eye. She aimed with her will. She pulled the trigger. The gun kicked hard against her palm, the recoil jarring her arm to the shoulder. The gunman in the duster jerked backward as if kicked by a mule. The bullet caught him high in the chest. He spun around and collapsed into the dirt, his pistol flying from his hand. May stood there, stunned, the smoking gun still raised. She had shot a man. She had drawn blood. The line between the girl she was and the woman she had to become had just been erased in a flash of gunpowder. "May down." Nantan's scream broke her trance. She saw Skinner, the man who had started the fight, rise up from behind the carriage. He was not aiming at Nantan. He was aiming at her. May tried to drop, but her legs felt like lead. Nantan moved. He didn't fire. He lunged. He threw his body across hers, shielding her with his own frame just as Skinner's rifle cracked. The impact was a dull thud, sickeningly wet. Nantan grunted, a sharp exhalation of air, and jerked violently against her. "No!" May screamed as they both tumbled to the dirt behind the wall. She scrambled to her knees, grabbing him. "Nantan, Nantan!" He was breathing hard, his teeth clenched. Blood was blooming on his side, just below the ribs. It was a fresh wound, separate from the shoulder injury. "It is a scratch," Nantan wheezed, though his face had gone gray. "He aimed high." "You are bleeding," May cried, pressing her hands against the wound to staunch the flow. Her hands were now covered in the blood of two men, one she had hurt, and one who had saved her. "Focus!" Nantan gripped her wrist. His eyes were blazing. "Do not let them come closer. Shoot if they move." The gunfire was intensifying. The soldiers were advancing on the ridge, and Pike's men were suppressing the garden wall. But suddenly, a bugle sounded again. "Cease fire! Hold fire! Hold fire! Damn you!" Lieutenant Evans' voice roared over the din. The shooting sputtered and died out, leaving a ringing silence in the yard. "Mr. Pike!" Evans shouted, standing up from behind the trough, his uniform dusty but his saber drawn. "Call off your dogs, or I will have my men shoot them where they stand." Pike looked around. His flanker was down, bleeding in the dirt. Skinner was reloading nervously. The cavalry was no longer looking at the ridge. 12 carbines were now pointed directly at Pike's posse. "Lieutenant, they shot my man." Pike shouted, pointing at the body May had dropped. "That woman is a killer." "Your man was flanking a civilian during a military engagement," Evans retorted, walking into the open. "And you, sir, started a firefight based on a fraudulent legal claim." Evans looked toward the garden wall. "Miss Calloway, are you unharmed?" May peered over the stones. She looked wild, her hair loose, her face streaked with dust and blood, a gun in her hand. "I am alive," she shouted back. "But you shot him. You shot Nantan." Evans looked at the ridge, where the Apache fire had stopped. He looked at the chaos in the yard. He realized he had been played for a fool, and his honor as an officer was tarnished by Pike's greed. "Bugler," Evans commanded. "Sound the retreat. We are withdrawing to the perimeter." "You can't leave," Pike screamed. "We have them trapped." Evans walked up to Pike's horse. He grabbed the bridle, pulling the animal's head down. "If you say one more word, Pike, I will arrest you for inciting a riot and filing false documents. Get your wounded and get off this land. This is a matter for the federal courts now, not the army." Pike stared at the lieutenant. He looked at the guns pointed at him. He looked at May, who was still aiming her revolver at his chest from across the yard. He had lost for today. "This isn't over," Pike spat. "The railroad always wins, Lieutenant, and you will be court-martialed for cowardice. Move out," Evans ordered, ignoring him. The soldiers mounted up. Pike's men scrambled to grab the wounded gunman. He was groaning, alive but out of the fight, and threw him over a saddle. Pike wheeled his horse around. He glared at May. His eyes were black holes of malice. "You think you won," Pike called out, his voice shaking with rage. "But look at you, blood on your hands, sleeping with savages. The town will never take you back. May Calloway, the land will bury you, both of you." He spurred his horse and galloped away, his men trailing behind him in a cloud of defeat. Lieutenant Evans lingered for a moment. He touched the brim of his hat to May. It was an apology. Then he turned and led his column back toward the road. As the dust settled, silence returned to Calloway Spring. But it was not the peaceful silence of the morning. It was the heavy, throbbing silence of a battlefield. May dropped the gun. It clattered against the stones. She turned to Nantan. He was slumped against the wall, clutching his side. The blood was dark against his skin. "They are gone," May whispered, tears cutting tracks through the dust on her face. "We did it. They are gone." Nantan looked up at her. He managed a weak, pained smile. "You read the paper. May, you stopped the army with a piece of paper and a bullet," May said, her voice breaking. She looked at her hands. They were trembling violently. "I shot him. Nantan, I shot a man." "You defended your home," Nantan said softly. He reached out and took her bloody hand in his. "The ink and the lead. Today, you used both." May leaned her forehead against his, sobbing with relief and horror. The climax had passed. The adrenaline was fading, leaving only the sharp, stinging reality of pain. "Let me look at your side," she said, sniffing back the tears. "It is deep," Nantan admitted, wincing as he shifted. "But the bone stopped it. I will live." He looked toward the ridge. The Apaches were gone. Yaslin had seen the soldiers leave and had vanished back into the canyons. They were safe for the moment, but the cost was etched into every inch of the farm. The fence was broken. The barn was riddled with holes. The earth was stained. May helped Nantan stand up. He leaned heavily on her, his arm draped over her shoulders. They walked slowly back toward the house, two wounded soldiers limping away from the front line. "Pike will come back," May said dully. "With lawyers? Or more guns?" "Maybe," Nantan said. "But not today. Today. The sun sets on us." They reached the porch. May looked out at the spring. It was still bubbling, clear and cool, indifferent to the violence that had just occurred. She realized then that Pike was right about one thing. She could never go back to being the girl who served drinks in the saloon. That girl was gone. In her place was a woman who could read a contract and fire a Colt. A woman who had chosen her side, and looking at the warrior beside her, whose blood was now mixed with hers on her dress, she knew she would make the same choice again, even if it meant the whole world burned. The silence that followed the departure of the cavalry was not the peaceful silence of the desert morning. It was a heavy, ringing silence, the kind that fills a room after a scream has been cut short. The dust settled slowly, coating the porch, the yard, and the two figures standing amidst the wreckage in a fine, red powder. May Calloway lowered her arms. Her muscles felt like water. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the standoff, through the reading of the deed, and through the pull of the trigger, evaporated all at once. She looked around the farm that had been her entire world for 23 years. It was ruined. The white picket fence her father had painted 3 summers ago was smashed into kindling where the cavalry horses had panicked. The vegetable garden, her source of food for the winter, was churned into mud by boots and hooves. The sandstone wall, her shield during the fight, was chipped and scarred by hundreds of bullets. But it was the house that broke her heart. The front of the cabin was riddled with holes. The window panes were shattered, jagged teeth of glass catching the afternoon sun. Inside, she knew. The bullet that had missed her head would be lodged in the wall, perhaps in the portrait of her mother or the wood of the dining table. "We won," Nantan said softly. He was leaning against the porch post, one hand pressing a bloody rag to his side. His voice was rough with pain, but there was a strange wonder in it. "Did we?" May asked. Her voice sounded hollow to her own ears. She walked down the steps, her boots crunching on spent brass casings. She walked to the spring. The water, usually crystal clear, was brown and murky, stirred up by the violence. A dark ribbon of blood from the man she had shot, or from Nantan, swirled in the eddy, staining the purity of the source. "It is just dirt and wood," Nantan said, limping up behind her. "It can be fixed." May looked at him. "It is not just wood. Nantan, it was my life. It was the only place I belonged." She looked at her hands. They were stained with gunpowder and dried blood. She rubbed them against her apron, but the stains seemed to be under the skin. She had shot a man. She had stood against the law. She had raised a weapon against the society she was supposed to be a part of. "I can fix the fence," May whispered, tears finally spilling over. "But I cannot fix what I did. I cannot unpull that trigger." From the shadows of the cottonwood trees, a figure emerged. It was Yaslin. The old Apache war leader had not retreated deep into the hills as she had thought. He had watched the soldiers leave, and now he rode his pony slowly into the yard. He did not look like a savior. He looked like a judge. Yaslin stopped his horse a few feet from them. He looked at Nantan, nodding with a grim approval at the bandage on the younger man's side. Then he turned his dark, ancient eyes to May. "You fight well, woman of the spring," Yaslin said in his heavy, halted English. "You fight like a badger in a hole." "Thank you," May said, wiping her face. "Do not thank me," Yaslin said. His voice was flat, devoid of cruelty, but heavy with truth. You have won the breath for today, but you have lost the air. What do you mean? Yaslin gestured toward the town of Redwater Crossing. The fat man Pike, he runs away now. But he is a snake. Snakes always come back when the hawk is sleeping. And the blue coats, they left because of the paper. But they will remember who held the gun. He leaned forward, resting his hands on the pommel of his saddle. Your people will not forget this. May, to them, you are no longer white. You stood with the Apache. You bled with us. You shot one of your own to save one of ours. May felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. I defended my home. In their eyes, you are a traitor, Yaslin said. They will not sell you grain. They will not buy your corn. When you walk down the street, they will spit. When you sleep, they will bring torches. You have no tribe there anymore. May looked toward the town. She imagined walking into the mercantile. She imagined the silence falling over the room. She imagined Mrs. Miller turning her back. She imagined the sheriff looking away. Yaslin was right. She had crossed a bridge and burned it behind her. She had saved Nantan, but in doing so, she had exiled herself. Then what do I do? May asked, her voice trembling. This is my land. My father is buried here. Bones stay, Yaslin said. Spirits travel. You must decide where your spirit can breathe. He turned his horse. We camp in the Red Canyon tonight. We wait for Nantan. If you are wise, you will not be here when the sun returns. Yaslin rode away, fading into the heat haze like a mirage. As the afternoon stretched into evening, another rider appeared. It was Sheriff Tom Briggs. He rode alone, without his badge pinned to his chest. He looked older than he had that morning. He stopped his horse at the broken gate and looked at the devastation. He saw the bloodstains in the dust. He saw May sitting on the steps, cleaning her revolver. Briggs dismounted and walked slowly up the path. He stopped 10 feet away. He did not put his hand on his gun. May, he said quietly. Sheriff, May replied. She didn't stand up. Briggs took off his hat and ran a hand through his thinning hair. I wanted to tell you, Skinner, the man you shot. The doctor says he will live. The bullet went through the shoulder. May let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. I didn't want to kill him. Tom, but he was going to kill Nantan. I know, Briggs said. He looked at Nantan, who was watching him from the doorway, rifle in hand. Briggs nodded at the Apache, a gesture of wary respect. I saw what happened. Pike's men were out of line. The lieutenant knows it. That is why he left. But Pike is not gone, May said. No, Briggs sighed. Pike is in his office right now. He is writing telegrams to Santa Fe. He is claiming you are insane. He is claiming the deed is a forgery. He is claiming you and the Apache ambushed his men. Briggs stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. Listen to me. May, I am the law here, but Pike is the money. And in this territory, money buys the law. By next week, he will have a judge in his pocket. He will have a warrant for your arrest for attempted murder, and this time, it will be real paper. May looked at the sheriff. She saw the shame in his eyes. He was a good man who was too weak to be good in a bad world. Why are you telling me this? May asked. Because your daddy was my friend, Briggs said, his voice cracking. And because what happened today, it was brave. Braver than anything I have done in 10 years. He put his hat back on. If I come back here tomorrow, May, I will have to arrest you. I will have to put you in irons and give you to Pike. And I do not think you will survive the jail cell. He looked at her, his eyes pleading. Do not be here, May. If the house is empty, I can report that the suspect fled. I can give you a head start. You are telling me to run, May said. I am telling you to live, Briggs said. He turned and walked back to his horse. Before he mounted, he looked back. Goodbye, May. He rode away without looking back, a solitary figure disappearing into the twilight. Night fell over Callaway Spring for the last time. The wind had died down, leaving the air cool and still. May and Nantan built a small fire in front of the cabin, using the broken wood from the fence. It seemed fitting to burn the barriers that had failed to protect them. They sat on the porch steps, watching the flames dance. Nantan's breathing was easier now. The bleeding had stopped, and he had bound the wound with fresh herbs he carried in his pouch. May held the old family Bible in her lap. The black leather cover was warm from the fire. For years, this book had been a heavy brick of mystery, a symbol of her inadequacy. Now, it felt lighter. "Read," Nantan said softly. It was not a command, but a request. May opened the book. She turned the pages carefully, her fingers tracing the columns of text. The firelight flickered over the words. They were still difficult. The letters sometimes danced and blurred, but if she focused, if she used the patience Nantan had taught her, they settled into meaning. She found a passage she remembered her father reciting. She wanted to see if the words on the page matched the words in her memory. The Lord is," May squinted, sounding out the syllables. "My shepherd." She looked at Nantan. He smiled, encouraging her. "I shall not want," she continued. Her voice gained strength. "He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters." May stopped. Tears pricked her eyes. Still waters, like the spring used to be, like the life she thought she would have. "It is beautiful," Nantan said. "The white man's God knows the value of water." "I can read it," May whispered, clutching the book. "I can actually read it." "You have the key now," Nantan said. "No one can lock the gate against you again." May looked at the house behind her. She looked at the dark windows. She had fought so hard to keep this place. She had learned to read to save it, and she had succeeded. The paper in her pocket proved she owned it. But ownership meant nothing if the neighbors brought torches. Ownership meant nothing if the law was a wolf waiting at the door. "This place taught me how to work," May said, stroking the cover of the Bible. "It taught me how to be alone, and you taught me that words have power." She looked at Nantan. The firelight cast deep shadows on his face, highlighting the sharp angles of his cheekbones and the depth of his eyes. "But words cannot stop a bullet in the dark," she said. "Briggs is right. If we stay, we die. Maybe not tomorrow, but soon. Then we do not stay," Nantan said. "But this is my home," May said, her voice breaking. "Where do I go? I am a farmer. I am not like you. I do not know the mountains." "Home is not the wood," Nantan said. He reached out and tapped his chest, then hers. "Home is where the fire burns. You carry the fire with you." He gestured to the vast darkness beyond the firelight. "Out there, it is hard. The wind is cold. The rocks are sharp. But out there, no one asks for a paper to let you breathe. Out there, you are judged by your heart, not your spelling." May looked out into the night. It terrified her. The unknown was a vast, black ocean. But staying here was drowning in shallow water. She looked at the Bible one last time. She closed it gently. She would take it with her. It was no longer a weight. It was a weapon she had mastered. The sun had not yet risen when Yaslin returned. He came with 2 other riders, leading a spare horse, a sturdy Mustang with a spotted coat. They waited by the gate, silent as stones. Inside the cabin, May was packing. She did not take much. She took the Bible. She took the photograph of her father in his uniform. She took the silk shawl her mother had brought from the East, wrapping it carefully in oilcloth. She took her father's revolver and the box of ammunition. She left the deed on the table. She left it right in the center, weighed down by a heavy stone. Let Pike find it. Let him see that she had not fled in panic, leaving the papers behind. Let him see that she had left it because it no longer mattered. She walked through the empty rooms. Her footsteps echoed on the wood. She touched the door frame where she had marked her height as a child. She touched the stove where she had baked 1,000 loaves of bread. "Goodbye," she whispered to the ghosts. She walked out onto the porch. Nantan was waiting for her. He had his rifle over his shoulder and a small pack on his back. He stood tall, despite the pain in his side. He watched her lock the door. It was a symbolic gesture. A lock would not stop Pike, but it was her way of closing the chapter. They stood together in the gray pre-dawn light. The air was cold and crisp. "Are you afraid?" Nantan asked. May looked at the spare horse Yaslin had brought. She looked at the mountains, dark purple silhouettes against the coming dawn. "Yes," May admitted. "I am terrified." "Good," Nantan said. "Fear keeps the eyes open." He stepped closer to her. The space between them vanished. He did not touch her with his hands, but his gaze held her fast. "You do not have to come," Nantan said softly. "You can go to Santa Fe. You can go east. You can find a life where there are no arrows." May looked up at him. She saw the scar on his lip. She saw the fierce intelligence in his eyes. She saw the man who had sat in a barn and taught her A is for apple while his own blood soaked his shirt. "If I go east, I go alone," May said. "If I go to Santa Fe, I am just a woman who lost her farm." She reached out and placed her hand gently on his chest, right over his heart. She could feel the steady, strong rhythm of it. "If I go with you," May whispered, "I do not know what I will be, but I know I will not be alone." Nantan covered her hand with his. "No, you will never be alone." "I am not going because I am afraid of Pike," May said, her voice fierce. "And I am not going because I have nowhere else to go. I am going because of you." Nantan made a sound low in his throat. He leaned down. This time, there was no hesitation, no interruption. He kissed her. It was not a kiss like in the dime novels she had seen others read. It was not flowery or polite. It was desperate and real. It tasted of wood smoke and coffee and the salt of tears. It was soft, surprisingly so. But beneath the softness was the iron promise of a man who had found the one thing he would die for. May melted into him, her hands clutching the rough fabric of his shirt. For a moment, the ruined farm, the looming threat of Pike, the uncertainty of the future, it all disappeared. There was only this connection, this choice. When they broke apart, breathless, the sun was just beginning to crest the horizon, painting the sky in violent streaks of orange and gold. "The sun is up," Nantan said, his forehead resting against hers. "We must ride." May nodded. She stepped back, wiping her lips with the back of her hand, a small smile touching her face. She walked down the steps. She walked past the broken fence. She walked past the muddied spring. She did not look back. She approached the spotted Mustang. She had ridden plow horses all her life, heavy and slow. This horse looked fast. It looked wild. She mounted up, swinging her leg over the saddle with a grace she hadn't known she possessed. She settled the reins in her hands. Yaslin watched her. He gave a single, sharp nod. "We ride for the high place," Yaslin said. "The air is thin there, but it is free." May looked at Sheriff Briggs, who was sitting on his horse on the ridge, watching them through a pair of field glasses. He lowered the glasses. He raised his hand in a slow, silent salute. May raised her hand in return. "Thank you, Tom, for the head start." She turned to Nantan. He was mounted on his own horse, watching her with a look of intense pride. "Lead the way," May said. Nantan kicked his heels. His horse leaped forward. May followed. They rode out of the yard, leaving Callaway Spring behind. They rode toward the mountains, toward the deep canyons where the cavalry could not bring their cannons, and where the law of the United States held no sway. As they crested the first hill, May looked down at the paper in her mind, the deed she had left on the table. She imagined Pike finding it. She imagined his rage. She smiled. She was May Callaway. She could read, she could shoot, and she was free. The falling action of her life at the farm was over. The rising action of her life as a legend was just beginning. The journey into the high country was an ascension not just through altitude, but through time. They left the flat, baked hardpan of the valley floor where the heat shimmered like a mirage, and climbed into a world of sharp red stone and thin, biting air. May Callaway rode the spotted Mustang Yaslin had brought for her. It was a different creature entirely from the plow horses she had known all her life. The animal moved with a fluid, nervous energy, placing its hooves among the loose shale with an instinctive intelligence. May had to learn to move with it, to let her body sway rather than stiffen. Every muscle in her legs ached, a dull throb that became the rhythm of her days. But she did not complain. She bit her lip and kept her eyes on the broad, straight back of Nantan, riding 10 paces ahead. The column of Apache moved like a shadow across the land. There were 20 of them in this band, warriors. Yes, but also women with infants strapped to cradle boards, and old men whose faces looked like the bark of the ponderosa pines they passed. They moved in silence, a discipline born of a lifetime of being hunted. For the first few days, fear was May's constant companion. Every time a hawk screeched, she flinched, expecting the crack of a cavalry carbine. Every time the wind shifted, she smelled the smoke of a burning farm. She looked back over her shoulder so often that her neck grew stiff. She expected to see Elias Pike's black coat, or Sheriff Briggs's weary silhouette, chasing her down to drag her back to the cage of laws and literacy she had just escaped. But as the days turned into a week, and the red rock canyons deepened around them, the fear began to recede. It was replaced by a vast, overwhelming awe. She saw waterfalls that cascaded down sheer cliffs into pools of emerald green. She saw forests of pines so tall they seemed to brush the belly of the clouds. She saw the world as Nantan saw it, not as a grid of property lines and fences, but as a living, breathing body that belonged to no one and everyone. "You ride well," Nantan said one afternoon. He had dropped back to ride beside her. His wound was healing, though he still favored his left side. "I ride because I have to," May replied, wiping dust from her face. "But this horse, he is smarter than I am." "He listens to the ground," Nantan said, patting the Mustang's neck. "You are learning to listen too. You stopped looking back yesterday." May paused. He was right. She hadn't looked back at the horizon since they crossed the river. "I suppose I did," she admitted. "There is nothing back there but ash and paper," Nantan reminded her gently. "But paper does not burn as well as wood." They made camp that night in a box canyon sheltered from the wind by towering walls of sandstone. The sun set early here, plunging the valley into a twilight of deep violet and indigo. This was the first time they had camped with the main group of Yeslin's band, rather than on the periphery. Fires were lit small, smokeless fires dug into the earth. The smell of roasting rabbit and sage filled the air. May sat near Nantan, feeling acutely aware of her pale skin and her yellow hair. To the women weaving baskets by the fire, to the children playing a silent game with stones, she was Indea the Wide-Eye. She was the face of the enemy. She kept her head down, fingering the worn leather of her father's Bible. She felt like an intruder at a family dinner, waiting to be asked to leave. Then, a shadow fell over her. May looked up. Standing before her was an elderly woman. Her hair was entirely white, 2 long braids that framed a face etched with 1,000 lines of laughter and grief. She wore a dress of soft buckskin, and around her neck was a necklace of blue turquoise. The woman did not speak. She held out a clay bowl. May hesitated. She looked at Nantan. "Take it," Nantan whispered. "It is Guyen. She is the mother of the band." May reached out with trembling hands and took the bowl. It was warm. Inside was a thick stew of meat and wild onions. "Thank you," May said in English. The old woman smiled. It was a toothless, brilliant smile that crinkled her eyes into crescent moons. She reached out a gnarled hand and touched May's hair, seemingly fascinated by the color. Then she said something in Apache, a soft, melodic phrase, and patted May on the shoulder before shuffling away. "What did she say?" May asked, bringing the bowl to her lips. "She said your hair catches the last of the sun," Nantan translated. "And she said that hunger has no tribe. Eat." May ate. The stew was gamey and strange, but it was the best thing she had ever tasted. As she looked around the circle of the firelight, she saw others nodding to her. A warrior she recognized from the battle at the farm raised his hand in greeting. A child stared at her with wide, curious eyes. She realized then that family was not defined by bloodlines or last names written in a family Bible. Family was the people who broke bread with you in the dark. Family was the people who stood shoulder to shoulder with you when the wind howled. She was not fully one of them yet. That would take time, and language, and trust. But she was no longer an enemy. She was a guest who had earned her seat by the fire. Later that night, when the camp had settled into the quiet hum of sleep, May and Antan sat by the dying embers of their own small fire. May reached into her saddlebag and pulled out a charcoal stick she had saved from the burned ruins of her barn, and the back of a discarded supply label she had found. It was not much, but it was enough. "Lesson time," she whispered. Nantan smiled. He moved closer, until his shoulder pressed against hers. The intimacy of the gesture was natural now, as essential as breathing. May flattened the paper on a smooth rock. "Tonight, we practice names, real names." She wrote 3 letters, M-A-E. "May," Nantan read. His voice was low and rough, adding a weight to the name that it had never possessed before. "Now yours," May said. She handed him the charcoal. Nantan hesitated. He took the stick awkwardly. His hands were made for the bowstring and the knife, for skinning deer and climbing rocks. The delicate act of writing felt foreign to him. "I do not know the letters for my name," he admitted. "The priests, they gave me a white name, Luke. I hated it." "Then we will write your true name," May said. "Sound it out." Together, they worked through the sounds. N-A-N-T-A-N. When he finished, Nantan stared at the word. He traced the lines with his calloused fingertip. "It looks rigid," he said. "Like a fence." "It is a mark," May said. "It says I am here. It says I exist." She took the charcoal back. "Now, I want to write the word you promised to learn, and the word you promised to teach me." She wrote the letters slowly, deliberately. P-A-T-I-E-N-C-E. Patience, Nantan read. He sighed, a sound that carried the weight of his people's history. "It is a hard word. May, when I see the soldiers, when I see the fences cutting the buffalo paths, the fire in my blood wants to burn." "I know," May said. She took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "But you taught me that the hawk waits. You taught me that the arrow aimed in anger misses, but the arrow aimed in silence strikes true." "And you," Nantan said, looking at her. "You faced the colonel. You faced Pike. You did not scream. You stood on the paper and made them listen." "I was terrified," May confessed. "That is what patience is," Nantan said. "It is terror that holds its breath." He squeezed her hand. "We will need this word. The world is changing. May, the iron horse will not stop. My people, we will have to learn to fight with more than just bows. We will have to learn to fight with these." He pointed to the letters on the paper. "And I will teach you," May promised. "Every night, until you can read every treaty they try to sign, until you can write your own story." 3 months passed, the seasons turned, and the aspen trees in the high country turned to rivers of gold. One afternoon, a trader rode into their camp. He was a Mexican man named Vargas, who drove a mule loaded with coffee, sugar, and ammunition. He traded with the Apache, keeping their location secret in exchange for safe passage through the canyons. May was grinding corn with the women when Vargas arrived. She pulled her shawl over her head, instinctually hiding her face, but she drifted close enough to hear the news. Vargas sat with Yaslin and Nantan, smoking a pipe. "The news from the lowlands is strange," Vargas said in Spanish, which Nantan translated for May later. "In Redwater Crossing, the great man, the railroad man Pike, is in much trouble." "Trouble?" Nantan asked. Federal marshals came from Santa Fe," Vargas chuckled. "They say he was forging land deeds. They say he was stealing money from the company and using the army as his private dogs. The colonel at the fort was very angry about being tricked." May's heart leaped. "And the sheriff?" Nantan asked. "The man with the sad eyes. Sheriff Briggs. Vargas nodded. They say he is the one who sent the packet of letters to the judge. He sent a copy of a deed that was supposed to be destroyed. He testified against Pike. Briggs is no longer sheriff, they fired him, but Pike is facing a judge. He has lost his position. The railroad has cut him loose. Later, standing by the edge of the canyon, May looked out toward the distant haze where her old life lay. He did it, May whispered. Tom finally stood up. And Pike has fallen, Nantan said. The ink arrow struck him. It was not a perfect victory. She knew that another man like Pike would come. The railroad would still be built. Her farm was likely overgrown or sold to a stranger. But knowing that her act of defiance, her reading of that paper, had started the avalanche that buried Elias Pike, it was enough. It is a small justice, May said. A paper justice. It is enough to keep the spirit warm, Nantan said. On the night of the first snowfall, Nantan came to May. He held something in his hand. It was a bracelet he had made himself. It was not gold or silver. It was carved from the bone of a deer, polished until it shone like ivory. In the center, he had set a small, smooth stone of red jasper, the color of the rocks at Callaway Spring. For you, Nantan said, fastening it around her wrist. Bone of the earth, blood of the stone. It means you are of the people now. Yaslin says you have walked the path long enough. May touched the cool bone. It felt more precious than any diamond Pike could have offered. It was a symbol of belonging that did not ask her to be anything other than what she was. I have something for you too, May said. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small square of paper. It was torn from the flyleaf of her Bible. On it, she had written a single sentence in her best, most careful script. She had practiced it for weeks, asking Nantan for the Apache words and translating them as best she could into English concepts. She handed it to him. Nantan held the paper to the firelight. He squinted, his lips moving silently as he decoded the letters. Home is where we choose. He looked up at her. His eyes were shining. Home is where we choose, he repeated firmly. I chose the barn, May said softly. I chose the road, and I choose this canyon, because you are here. Nantan folded the paper carefully and placed it in the medicine pouch he wore around his neck, next to the sacred pollen and the flint. Ink and bone, Nantan said. Tradition and words. We bind them together. The story of May Callaway and Nantan faded from the gossip of the towns, becoming something else entirely. In Redwater Crossing, they told the story of the crazy spinster who ran off with a savage, a cautionary tale for girls who read too much. But in the bunkhouses and the saloons, when the whiskey flowed, some men whispered a different version. They spoke of the woman who stared down the cavalry. They spoke of the sheriff who found his conscience. And in the high mountains, among the people, a different legend grew. They spoke of the woman with sun hair who brought the magic of the white man's letters. Not to conquer, but to defend. They spoke of the warrior who learned that the strongest weapon was not the one that drew blood, but the one that spoke truth. The winter came deep and white, but the fire in the canyon burned hot. One clear, freezing night, the sky was a dome of polished obsidian, scattered with stars so bright they hurt the eyes. May and Nantan lay on a pile of buffalo robes, looking up at the heavens. The silence was absolute, a cathedral of peace. The stars, May whispered. They look like letters, like God is writing on the sky. What does he write? Nantan asked, his arm tightening around her shoulders. May raised her hand. She traced the shapes among the constellations. She connected the bright belt of Orion to the Pleiades. L, she traced, a vertical line, a horizontal one. O, she circled a cluster of stars. V, she drew a sharp angle. E, she finished. Love, Nantan said. He knew that word. It was the first one he had felt, even before he knew the letters. It is the only law that matters, May said. Pike had his contracts. The army had its orders. But this needs no signature. No signature, Nantan agreed. He turned to her, his face close. Just two hearts beating in the dark? And a little bit of patience. May smiled. And a little bit of reading. Nantan laughed. He kissed her then, under the vast, indifferent, beautiful sky of the American West. It was a kiss of equals, a kiss of survivors, a kiss that tasted of pine needles and promise. In a land where survival had to be snatched from the teeth of the wolf, they had managed to steal something even rarer. They had stolen a life of their own choosing. And as the snow began to fall softly, covering their tracks and the world below, May Calloway knew that she was finally, truly, home. Author's note to the audience. Thank you so much for riding along with me on this journey through the dust, the ink, and the high mountains with May and Nantan. It has been a pleasure to spin this yarn for you. If you enjoyed this story, I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment down below and tell me, where are you listening from? Are you in a busy city dreaming of the open range? Or are you sitting on your own porch watching the sunset? Let's swap stories in the comments section. And if you want to hear more tales from the frontier, more stories of love and grit under the western stars, please make sure to subscribe to my channel, Wild West Tales. Give this video a like if it touched your heart. And if you really want to help these stories reach more folks, go ahead and hit that hype button. It helps more than you know. Until next time, keep your powder dry and your heart open. Goodbye, partners.